Hey guys, today I've got two cars on the desk here to introduce to the channel. This one over here is actually just the freshened up version of my Bomber from the budget build series last year. This thing is basically a new car other than the chassis, but I want to show you what has been done to this and what it has in common with this car here. As I mentioned, this is the Bomber from the budget build series. It's just been completely freshened up. Basically, this car got completely stripped down and freshened up top to bottom for the upcoming season. The Bomber is my favorite car to drive, and since it's my favorite car to drive, that is actually why this car here was built. To highlight what changes were made to this Bomber since the budget build series, we'll just kind of do a quick overview and I'll hit all of the highlights. Under the interior, basically, we're unchanged on this car currently. I'm still running the Tekin Rock 412 3000 kV Pro 4 HD. And pushing that Pro 4 HD is the Tekin RX8 Gen 2. That and the transmission are unchanged at this point. Moving outwards from the transmission, what we've got is basically a freshened up set of links. We've got the Vanquish trailing arms in the rear, titanium upper links front and rear, and the same stainless lower front links that I was running before. Those links are connected to a set of gray Vanquish V2 axles that have the same blue Stage 1 kit on this car that you saw during the build series. In the front of this car, I've updated the servo to the Futaba S9177 SV. A fast, strong servo that's been doing really well for me. That servo's putting the power to the wheels from the new Vanquish 25-tooth servo horn. Speaking of wheels, what I'm running on here now is a set of gray Vanquish KMC Bully 127 2.2 wheels in the 1.2 inch width. I've updated the look of those wheels with some blue beadlock rings. On those new KMC Bully wheels, I've thrown a set of the new 2.2 Hyrax tires. Attaching the new axles to the chassis, I've also updated the shocks on this car. I decided to go with a set of Proline Pro Spec shocks front and rear. This is a 3.5 inch set of short core shocks in the front and a 4 inch set in the rear. The front shocks, I'm running the yellow Pro Spec springs. In the rear, I'm running the blue Pro Spec springs. And lastly, I also updated the sway bar on this car to the Vanquish V2 version of the Curry Anti-Rock sway bar. This sway bar is designed for an Axial Yeti. However, to run it on my Bomber, all I did was remove the 40mm link that normally goes on the rear end links and simply replace that with a 4mm thread, 25mm long set screw between the two Revo rod ends to get the length exactly where I wanted it. And after all that talk about the updating I've done on my Bomber, that brings us to the brand new UCFab BDI that you see here in front of you. Now, this car may not immediately appear as if it has a lot in common with my Bomber. However, the entire purpose of this truck was to emulate and work with a truck that was built like my Bomber here. Some of you may remember that I was building a UCFab PRT U4 truck last year. However, U4, I really like watching it, going to the track, hanging out with everyone. As far as the actual racing part of it though, it's just not for me. So I decided that I wanted to swap that truck out for this type of truck, which is more based on my Bomber, which I really enjoy just taking on trails, doing some rock bouncing with it, hill climbing, all of those types of things that are more suited to a non-purpose built U4 truck. Now, UCFab has named this chassis the BDI, and that stands for Bomber Drop-In. The point of this chassis was to be able to take your built Bomber and remove the chassis and swap on this chassis. Now, that's not what I did because I love my Bomber, and building another car wasn't that big of a deal for me. So what I did is I took and got a brand new Axial Racing Bomber skid plate, threw it under there, and then everything else on this car is aftermarket. I'll add the parts list that I'm using for this car in the description and things like that. As you see this car right here, it's not exactly near running yet. I just have a set of dummy wheels and tires on it that I had laying around. This car will get an all new set of wheels and tires here very shortly, but what I wanted to show today was some features in the design of the BDI itself. This is a fully TIG welded steel chassis. I started discussing the idea of this car with Kyle over at UCFab almost a year ago. Around Axial Fest last year, we're doing some brainstorming and I came up with that I wanted a new car that was like my Bomber. And as far as the styling goes, UCFab does a lot of these radius style tubes on a lot of their cars. And I wanted to slightly emulate the look of Ben Napier's Penhall Fab Ultra 4 car. Now, that car is an IFS car, and an IFS car was not what I was looking for. I wanted to stay with solid axle front and rear. So we took some styling cues from it as far as the radius style roofline, the shape of the front of the hood, as well as the shock towers behind the B-pillar. This car is built just like the Bomber to use a trailing arm rear suspension and a shock on axle style front suspension. One key design feature of this car is the modified shock position for a nice low ride height while maintaining a lot of up travel ability. This allows you to keep a nice low ride height, but still allow your axles to come way up into the chassis when you either come off a jump or hit a big ledge. The rear shock mounts on this car were designed with being able to run dual shocks. Now, to run dual shocks, you do need to use kind of a custom setup length shock in the rear. This one we're using a Proline Power Stroke 5-inch body off of the Yeti with a shorter stroke shock shaft. This allows us to get full travel out of that front shock that runs the coils, and then the rear is just acting as an additional damper. The chassis is also built to tuck in a Vanquish Curry sway bar in behind the second set of shocks for a nice cool look that keeps everything tucked in tight and fits within the much narrower rear portion of this chassis. The position of the rear spare tire was something that could be modified, and this was the position that I wanted it to sit in. I like a little bit of an angle on it and pushed a little bit further back. I like to position a spare tire back in this because it will help catch you from going over backwards. The body panels on this car are something that I would really like to showcase. During the construction of this chassis, I had Kyle send me a basic shape of the lower portion of this chassis. And from there, I took and I mocked up each one of those tubes into CAD and created what the base of this chassis would be. From that point, with the chassis in CAD, I went and started to design the body panels with some extra depth and 3D to them that you couldn't get with hand forming a panel. Something that you'll never get out of a Lexan panel. I added kind of a reverse hood scoop that dips down with some gills on the side of the hood, and then added some functional air intakes on the side panels. Now, whether they actually bring in much air, highly doubtful. It's just something I did to just be just a little bit different and add a little bit more of a cool factor. Now, being that these are 3D printed panels, however, it does give me a little bit of a hurdle. I normally like to have custom printed wraps done for all of my cars. It's just something that I always have liked to have done. But this one is a little bit more involved and maybe a little bit more difficult to wrap, actually. So I don't know exactly what I'll do there. If you guys have a suggestion, feel free to leave it in the comments below. Now, even though this does currently use a factory Bomber skid plate, I am planning on using an Axial 3-gear style transmission out of something like an SCX-10. It puts the motor nice and low. It'll allow me to run Yeti rear drive shafts front and rear in this car. Overall, I think that will help me get the optimum performance out of this car. Now, those transmissions do take more investment to get built to the point where they will take something like the Pro 4HD that I have in this Bomber with all stock internals. Now, there's also some options like 3D printed skid plates that I could go to on this car. We'll see if I decide to go that way. I'm not a big fan of 3D printing on skid plates, but we may give it a shot on here. Lastly, the bad news. This is a custom build because it's an all custom chassis, and all custom chassis are all labor, which means there's only a certain amount that can get done in a set of time. It's not a production thing that can just be done by putting it on a machine. So that means to have one of these yourself, you need to be put on a list. To inquire about getting put on the build list is something that you would need to go to the UCFab Facebook page, which I'll link below, and then you can email them. Now, as of this video, which is the very last day of May, that build list is actually closed. So currently, you can't put yourself on a list to have one of these built yet. But if you are a passionate RC guy who's passionate about having something like this yourself, keep an eye on the UCFab Facebook page, and in the future, there's a good chance that you'll likely be able to pick up something like this yourself. So with that bit of news, guys, thanks for watching this one. You'll see a lot more on my UCFab BDI here as the months go. I'd like to have this thing done by Axial Fest, which is about a month and a half away. That's my goal. I'd like to have it ready for the rock racing that they've got set up in the trophy class at Axial Fest. If it doesn't make it, it doesn't make it. I've got other trucks I can run in other classes, but I would like to have this truck done by then. So that's the deadline I'm putting on myself. We'll see how that goes. But thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoy trucks like this, even though it's not something that's readily attainable. If you do like trucks like this, I've got another project coming very soon that we just started the other day that should really be impressive as well. Thanks for watching, guys. That's all I've got for tonight on this new project. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.